Welcome to ICN Sunday Morning. I'm Vernon Loeb, Executive Editor. There are 39 large wildfires burning in the country right now, the largest of which, called the Dragon Bravo Fire, is burning out of control around the north rim of the Grand Canyon. It has burned down the historic lodge there and prompted the National Park Service to close the north rim for the rest of 2025. Joining me this morning to talk about the threat of wildfires on a warming planet is somebody who really knows what he's talking about, Michael Kodas, our senior editor based in Boulder, Colorado. Michael, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
It's great to be with you, even in 2D.
You know, I kid you that you're one of the only people I've ever met in journalism who's equally good with pictures and words. You're a great nature photographer, and also a noted author. You've written a book that is still on the top of everybody's wildfire book list. It's called Megafire: A Race to Extinguish a Deadly Epidemic of Flame. So tell us, is the Dragon Bravo fire burning around the North Rim a megafire? And what is a megafire?
So yeah, the Dragon Bravo fire on the north rim of the Grand Canyon now does meet the U.S. Forest Service definition of a megafire, which is any fire that's bigger than 100,000 acres. But if you talk to fire scientists or land managers or foresters, they'll tell you that measuring how mega a fire is just by how big it is not necessarily the best way to determine the actual impacts. We have lots of fires that are bigger than 100,000 acres that burn in remote areas of forested lands or in wildernesses where big fires like that have always burned. And those have a lot less societal impacts than a lot of the small fires. In fact, if you look back historically in the last 10 or 20 years, the Paradise Fire, the fires that devastated Los Angeles early this year, the Lahaina fire in Maui, and the Marshall Fire down the street from my house here are some of the nation's deadliest and most destructive fires and costliest fires. And they're all tiny compared to the megafire standard. And usually it's much smaller fires that have the really big impacts.
Yeah. Have there been other big fires, even mega fires in national parks?
Yeah, mega fires occasionally affect national parks. Very often they start out outside the park and they get so big that they move into parks like, say, Sequoia National Park in California, which suffered greatly under some fires a few years ago. But the fires that affect our national parks, or at least the fire that everybody thinks of as far as our national parks go, would be the Yellowstone fire of 1988, which was a very controversial fire at the time because this was one of the first fires where the National Park Service allowed the fire to burn and in certain areas and do what it would do naturally to kind of bring parts of Yellowstone back in line with what those forests had been historically. And at the time, because it hurt tourism so much, having this fire burn through the summer and how dramatic it was with the changes it imposed on the park, that was really criticized. And politicians in all of the states around Yellowstone were just calling for the heads of the director of the park for the National Park Service and the people that were in charge of that fire. But if you visited that land with a forester or a land manager a few years after that fire burned, they would be able to show you how most of those forests were much healthier a few years after that fire was allowed to burn than a few years before it. And it's now recognized that that was actually the right thing to do. And even though it was very disruptive to the park and to a lot of people's summer plans, it really was beneficial to the wildlife in Yellowstone, to the natural environment in Yellowstone, and to the health of the forests there.
Yeah. So what's so difficult about the Dragon Bravo fire to fight? This thing's been burning for like a month now. What gives?
Well, it's an incredibly difficult terrain. You can imagine that a fire on the rim of the Grand Canyon presents all kinds of hazards to firefighters with falls and rugged areas that are very difficult to access and very difficult to get out of if you were having to escape the fire. So that's part of it. It's also had very, very difficult weather, fire weather. So, the relative humidity has been very low, temperatures have been very high. There have been lots of instances with very high winds, and those are very favorable to the spread and explosiveness of a wildfire, and very unfavorable to wildland firefighters and the aircraft and people on the ground that have to deal with a fire.
Yeah. Now, this fire is not burning down into the Grand Canyon, is it?
Well, it's certainly spotting into the canyon. There's not as much fuel in the canyon, in the desert terrain there, as there is on the rim, where you've got some very dense and forests, very thick with fuel. But certainly, there have been plenty of embers and things fall into the Grand Canyon and start smaller spot fires. Those very often are easier to deal with in some ways, just because there's not as much fuel there, than they are when they're up on the rim in those really thick forests.
Yeah. So one of the overarching themes of your book, Megafire, is that, budget cuts and poor public policy and poor firefighting practices historically are only making this climate amplified problem that much worse. Um, that being the case, bring us up to date now with, uh, the Trump Doge cuts to the Forest Service, the Interior Department, the Park Service, to FEMA. If management has been a problem historically, where are we now that our frontline agencies, to some extent, have been decimated through budget cuts and other cutbacks? Where are we right now in terms of our ability to cope with the wildfire problem?
Well, we're seeing kind of two forces come together. One is natural, which is we are facing a very bad fire season. And, we have a wildfire emergency here in Colorado with new fires on the western slope, and another fire that's been devastating one of the national parks here in Colorado, the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. There's a wildfire emergency in Utah. We've got a very big and very dangerous fire near the Central Coast in California that just started in the last few days. So the country is looking at one of its worst fire seasons in a very long time. And then on the other side of that, we have political forces that are coming together to change every aspect of how the nation deals with wildfires. And that means that a lot of the people dealing with these fires are effectively having to build the plane of wildland firefighting while they're flying it. So we've seen substantial cuts to all of the land management agencies that fight wildfire. And although the administration has said that it has not fired any professional wildland or full-time wildland firefighters, it's gotten rid of all kinds of people who do some wildland firefighting or contribute to the effort. Very often, what they call collateral firefighters, who are firefighters who are certified to fight wildland fires but have a different job. They might be an accountant, or they might do trail work, or do some type of science in a national park or a national forest. But they join a wildland firefighting crew when they're needed, and they get called in. And we lost a lot of those folks. There are a lot of firefighters who were fired and then asked to come back, who are choosing not to come back because it's a dangerous and physically taxing job that doesn't have the greatest pay in the world. And why would you do that for some place that fires you one day, brings you back the next day, furloughs you the next day? So, that's affecting the actual boots on the ground that can fight these fires. But a lot of people are not considering all the other ways in which the changes that the administration is imposing are affecting wildland firefighting. The biggest change that the administration has announced is that it's going to take firefighters from all of these agencies that work on wildfire, the 5 land management agencies, which are the U.S. Forest Service and the Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and combine them all into one wildland firefighting organization. And you can think of that kind of like you would think about if we did that at the Pentagon and we decided that all of the people in the Marines and the Air Force and the Navy and the Army and the Coast Guard that dealt with a specific type of conflict were all going to be combined into a new agency. And we were going to do that while they were fighting a war. How disruptive that would be. But we're also getting it from very many other sides of our wildland firefighting support system. For instance, the cuts to NOAA and the National Weather Service means that firefighters who are probably the most dependent on weather reports for their work of almost any workers for land management agencies are not getting as thorough and as up to date a wildland fire weather prediction as they would like to see. And here in Colorado, that really hits home because one of our worst wildland fire disasters were 14 hotshots and smoke jumpers and helicopter crewmen who were all killed by a fire when they did not get the report that the weather was going to turn and blow that fire in their direction in time to escape it. So that's a change that a lot of people don't think about, but actually can put wildland firefighters' lives at risk. On the other, another corner of this would be looking at the fire science that gets supported. And we've seen huge cuts to all kinds of science done by NOAA and other agencies that support wildland fire, and particularly cuts to anything that was focused on climate science. Well, climate is having a huge impact on wildfire across the country. So if we're not studying that, we're again handicapping our wildland firefighters with boots on the ground because they're not going to understand the phenomenon that they're seeing as well as they could. So there are just myriad ways in which the administration is changing the way that we're dealing with wildfire and handicapping the people that are on the front lines of this. Or, they would claim that they're not handicapping them, but this much disruption during a big fire year while those fires are actually burning is extremely difficult for wildland firefighters to deal with.
Yeah, I was just listening to Michael Lewis talk about how one of the things government does is it mitigates risk. And it sounds to me like you're uh, going through one by one all the layers of risk mitigation that the government used to provide that on some level another has been weakened or eliminated. I also, remember the disaster of Hurricane Katrina when this epic hurricane hit New Orleans, and the federal response was sort of nothing for days on end. Um, it's possible, I guess, given the severity of this fire season, that we could see an event like that this summer, where a mega fire starts to burns down a city, and the federal government is just AWOL.
Yeah, that's very much a possibility, and the impacts on our wildland firefighters actually spread to those other disasters. Wildland firefighters are trained to be able to respond to all hazards, and so wildland firefighters respond to hurricanes, and they respond to flooding disasters, all kinds of other types of disasters. These often end up being people who are on the front lines working on those disasters, and the disruptions that we're seeing in wildland fire are very likely to filter down to other things that these people respond to. Another way in which this has been impacted is one of the most important things for all emergency responders, and particularly those in wildland fire, are what we call lessons learned. When things go wrong, like what we saw with Katrina, or some of the things that went wrong with the fires in LA, and the really horrible things that go wrong, where we end up seeing emergency responders being severely injured or losing their lives, say fighting fires. There are investigators that spend a lot of time looking into that so that it doesn't happen again. And those reports are passed on as lessons learned, and they lead to all kinds of new training for wildland firefighters so they can avoid being in the situation where they might lose their life like that. All of the investigators who were involved in putting together those lessons learned for wildland firefighters were fired by DOJ. So if we were to see a horrible disaster like this, it's likely we wouldn't learn nearly as much from it and be able to prevent it in the future because we don't have the expertise to do that.
Yeah, yeah. This is getting pretty scary pretty fast. I went on vacation this year to Hawaii. See, I've got my Maui t-shirt on. And I drove through Lahaina, which was the town on Maui that got wiped out by a wildfire almost exactly 2 years ago this week. And it was really chilling to see this idyllic tropical town, reduced to literally ashes, or at this point, vacant lots. And for me, it was a reminder of the climate threat and of the fact that there are no safe havens anymore, even on a remote corner of the island of Maui. All right, enough doom and gloom. I want you to end today by telling me something about fighting wildfires that we can feel hopeful about, that will give us some sense that there is something we can do to cope with this disgorge, on a warming planet.
Well, going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, and the biggest change that we're looking at in wildland firefighting is the creation of this wildland firefighting agency that's standalone from all of these other land management organizations, from FEMA, from NOAA, from all of the agencies that contribute to our wildland firefighting effort. And a lot of wildland firefighters, particularly in leadership, have wanted to do that for a long time and have thought that that makes a lot of sense. So that there's great potential for an agency like that to eliminate a lot of the confusion and a lot of the difficulty that comes with coordinating all of these very complex fire responses, particularly in a fire year like we're seeing right now, with big bad fires blowing up all over the place, and the resource management being very difficult. And one of the hopeful things is that the people that are really stepping up to get involved with putting this agency together are veteran wildland firefighters who really know what they're doing. And there are a lot of incident commanders. There's a lot of people that have been working fire across the country for a very long time that have some really good ideas about how we can do this better and how we can respond to wildland fire better. I don't think many of them like doing this while we're having such a bad fire season explode, but they are very committed to trying to help us put together a better response system. And so we have a lot of very smart, devoted, and well-trained emergency responders that are looking at how we can do this better and responding to the changes that are being imposed by the administration as an opportunity to rebuild things in a way that is going to be more effective for dealing with the kinds of disasters that we're seeing in the Grand Canyon right now.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like when we created the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, which I don't know what I think of it at this point. I guess there are some good aspects of it. I think a lot of mistakes were made. I guess in this case, right, it'll be how it's implemented and whether it's funded to determine whether it's a good reform or not.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong, and you can just imagine with the huge changes that are being imposed, there are lots and lots and lots of decisions that need to be thought out and made well for this to work out well. But we do have a lot of very smart people involved in this conversation, outside of a lot of the people who have imposed the changes who don't have any background in wildland fire or forestry or land management. And those people who have been doing this for a long time and are involved in this really want to see it work and really want to see it work well. So we do have some really good heads involved in this.
Okay, I'll take that as good news. Michael, thanks so much for being here. I'm really thrilled that our readers got a chance to meet you and listen to you talk. You know, you do so much for us. You edit our Western coverage, you edit all our photos. You bring such an incredible wealth of knowledge to the table every week, not only about climate, not only about fire in particular, but about climate in general. So I tremendously rely on your counsel in so many ways. And I know you've got a fire series in the works, do you not?
Yeah, we have. We're about to launch the opening story for a series looking at all of these things that we've just talked about all of the challenges that wildland firefighters are facing this season, not just from the personnel cuts, but from changes in the way the Weather Service is working, changes in fire science, changes in investigations into wildfires, how all of that's going to affect wildland firefighting in the U.S. And we're very fortunate to have a number of really good reporters who understand various corners of that, so that we have lots of people on a very deep bench that we can tap to contribute to that kind of coverage.
Yes, great. Again, thanks so much for being here. And thanks to all of you for watching and for reading and for supporting our work at Inside Climate News.